What happens when the ghosts of the past never leave? When the school you've always known is hiding a dark secret? A group of students stumbles upon a terrifying truth buried beneath the halls of their high school. A sinister force feeding off fear, trapped within its walls. As they uncover the school's deadly history, one question remains: who will survive the curse? Watch Disturbing True School Horror Stories and find out. It began quietly. So quietly, in fact, that at first no one really noticed. It was just a student here, a classmate there, slipping away into the shadows without so much as a trace. At Westbrook High, where gossip and rumors spread like wildfire, a missing student would usually be met with whispers in the hallway and a few passing glances. But as the weeks wore on, the disappearances became harder to ignore. It started with James Harper, a quiet but popular senior who'd been seen last on a Wednesday afternoon, just before the final bell. He'd gone home, or so everyone thought, but when his friends tried to reach him that evening, his phone went straight to voicemail. By the time the next morning rolled around, his locker was still locked, his homework untouched, and the rumors about his sudden departure began to buzz louder than the school's outdated PA system. At first, the teachers dismissed it as a runaway situation, a personal choice or family problems. James had always been a bit of an enigma, keeping to himself more than most students. But Emily, who had been one of his few friends, didn't buy it. Something didn't feel right. Her gut told her there was more to it. James would never just vanish without a word. She felt the unease in her bones. Something dark was moving in the school. Then, it happened again. Chloe Matthews, a quiet freshman who sat behind Emily in history class, disappeared without a trace just days later. No goodbye. No messages. Chloe's parents searched for days, but it was as if she had never existed at all. Emily couldn't shake the connection between the two disappearances. It was too eerie, too similar, and there was something unsettling about the way the school seemed to brush it all off. Teachers said nothing. Students went about their days, as if it were just another fleeting incident in the routine of high school life. But for Emily, it wasn't just another story. She felt it, something was wrong. She began to notice strange patterns in the disappearances. Students who had all been near the same part of the school, around the east wing near the old classrooms and storage areas. What was it about that part of the building? She couldn't quite place it, but something was definitely off. Emily wasn't alone in her suspicion. Her close-knit group of friends, Ryan, Sarah, and Ben, began to notice the same unsettling details. They too felt that the disappearances weren't the random acts they were being told to believe. Every time they saw the police in the hallways, their stomachs turned. No one else seemed concerned. There was no panic, no urgency. Are we really going to just sit here and pretend everything's normal? Emily said to Ryan one evening, her voice low as they sat in the library surrounded by towering bookshelves. She wasn't sure if she was speaking to herself or to Ryan anymore. Something's happening here. People are disappearing, and no one cares. Ryan, who had been her closest confidant since freshman year, looked at her with his steady blue eyes, his brow furrowed. I don't know, Em, it's messed up, but what can we do? They're not telling us anything. He stopped, looking out across the library, his voice barely above a whisper. We don't have the answers. It was the haunting emptiness in his voice that made Emily's skin crawl. They were all starting to feel it. This creeping feeling that they were living in a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. The unease was palpable throughout the school. Classes felt longer, like time itself was stretching and slowing, suffocating the students. The walls, once familiar and safe, now felt cold and hollow. Emily couldn't ignore it anymore. Every night the dreams would come, the dark, swirling visions of the missing students, faces twisted with fear. She couldn't remember all the details, but there was always one thing in every dream. The faces of those who had vanished stared back at her with a silent plea. Help me, they seemed to whisper. It's not what it seems. It wasn't until the fourth disappearance, that of a senior named Jared, that the police finally took notice. But even then, the response was too little, too late. By the time the police arrived, the halls of Westbrook High had already become a battleground of whispers and suspicion. Emily and her friends couldn't stay silent any longer. Emily, who had always considered herself the skeptic of the group, felt a fire ignite inside her. This was bigger than her fears. It was bigger than the school. She needed to know the truth. She and Ryan decided to investigate the one place no one dared go, the forgotten, disused part of the school, the East Wing, where most of the missing students were last seen. The school had recently sealed off the area, citing construction, but Emily wasn't fooled. The entire situation felt like a cover-up, and she wasn't about to let fear stop her from finding out what had happened to James, Chloe, and the others. That night, as Emily and Ryan made their way through the back corridors, their footsteps echoing in the silence, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The air felt different here, stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. The flickering overhead lights seemed to mock their every step, casting long, jagged shadows on the walls. It wasn't long before they came across a locked door, an old, rusted door with a faded sign reading "Restricted Access." Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that behind this door lay the secrets they had been searching for. But as she reached for the handle, something stopped her. A sharp, unsettling sound echoed from within the room. It was the unmistakable sound of something or someone scratching at the walls. Without thinking, Emily pushed the door open. The musty smell of mold and old paper hit them both like a physical blow. Inside, they found a room full of dusty files, old textbooks, and a broken desk. But it wasn't the contents of the room that made Emily's breath catch. It was the feeling that washed over her, a feeling that the room itself was alive, holding its breath as if it knew they were there. Ryan turned to her, his face pale. "What is this place?" Emily swallowed hard, her eyes scanning the room. She had no idea what was lurking inside the walls of Westbrook High, but one thing was certain. Whatever it was, it had waited for a very long time. And now, it was ready to reveal its secrets. The school library, usually a haven of quiet solitude, had become a place of creeping dread. The once familiar smell of old books and polished wood now felt heavy, oppressive. The shelves, stacked with textbooks and forgotten novels, seemed to loom over Emily as she sifted through the dust-laden volumes. She and Ryan had spent the last few days digging through the school's archives, trying to uncover any information that might explain the mysterious disappearances. But every answer seemed to lead to more questions, and the more they searched, the more the weight of the building's secrets pressed in on them. Ryan was at the back of the library, sorting through dusty yearbooks and old student records, while Emily prowled the front, scanning rows of forgotten tomes. Her fingers brushed over the worn leather spines, each one a relic of the past, untouched for years. She had to find something, anything, that might explain the strange occurrences that had started plaguing the school. Her heart skipped when she noticed something unusual. A small, half-hidden leather-bound book wedged between two larger volumes. The edges were frayed and the cover was darkened with age. But the moment her fingers brushed against it, a strange sensation coursed through her, a prickling at the back of her neck, a sudden unease that she couldn't shake. Curious, Emily pulled the book free. The title was faded and barely legible, but she could make out the word Samuel, the name of the missing student who had written the diary. The rest of the cover was blank, almost as if it had been deliberately erased, leaving only the name behind. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized this was no ordinary diary. This was the key. She opened it carefully, the pages crackling with age. The first entry was dated years ago when Samuel was just a sophomore, before the first disappearance. As Emily began to read, the hairs on her arms stood up. March 19th, 1996. The darkness is growing. I feel it in the walls. I hear it at night in the hallways. It calls to me. I don't know how much longer I can stay here. Every night, I see things that I shouldn't see. Things I don't want to see. I hear voices whispering my name, telling me things I can't understand. The school is alive. It watches us, and it is feeding on our fear. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she read the entry, her mind racing. The school is alive. She had heard rumors over the years. Ghost stories, rumors of strange happenings in the old part of the building, but this was different. Samuel had written this as if he knew what was coming. But the words were more than just eerie. They were a warning. He was trying to tell someone something, trying to warn them of the same dark force that was now haunting her. Her fingers trembled as she turned the page, eager to learn more. The next entry was even more chilling. April 3rd, 1996. I've been trying to understand what's happening to me, to the school. I've seen things that don't belong. Yesterday, I saw a figure in the corner of the hallway staring at me. It had no face, just shadows. I ran, but I couldn't escape. The school has claimed me. It's using me. It wants me to help it. It needs my fear. I tried to talk to Mr. Harris, but he just smiled and told me everything would be fine. I don't trust him. He knows more than he's letting on. I think he's part of it. I've seen him in the old wing at night. He's not who he says he is. No one is. I'm scared, Emily. If you find this, I'm sorry. I didn't want to drag you into this. But the building has a hunger. It needs sacrifices. I'm one of them. And I think you might be next. Emily's heart raced. Samuel had written this for her, his last plea, but what had happened to him? Where had he gone? Had he vanished like the others, a victim of whatever evil force had claimed the school? The urgency in his words weighed heavily on her chest. And then she read something even more disturbing. The final entry was scrawled hastily, almost as if Samuel had been writing in a panic, desperate to finish his last thoughts before something or someone interrupted him. April 5th, 1996. I can't escape. The building is watching me. The teachers are part of it. The students too. I don't know who I can trust anymore. Every night I feel it growing stronger. The rituals, the disappearances. I've seen them, the spirits. They're trapped in the walls. We're all trapped. I've seen the way the school is feeding, and I know now what it needs. It needs our fear, our terror. And it needs someone to bring it back. Someone with bloodline ties to the land, to the asylum that stood here before. They want me to help them, but I won't. I won't let it take me. I'll burn the school down before I let it win. The entry was abruptly cut off. The last sentence was left unfinished, but the implication was clear. Samuel had known about the ritual. He had known the truth. And whatever had happened to him, whatever had taken him, had stopped him from finishing his warning. Emily stared at the pages in her hands, the room feeling suddenly colder. The silence around her was deafening. She turned to look at Ryan, who had been standing behind her watching her read. "Emily," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What does this mean? What really happened to him?" Emily felt the weight of his question, but the answer was just beyond her grasp. She had never believed in ghosts or spirits, but after reading Samuel's diary, she couldn't deny it any longer. The school wasn't just haunted, it was alive. And its hunger was growing. They had to act quickly. Because Emily knew deep down that the disappearances weren't random. The school was choosing its victims, and now it was coming for them. The discovery of Samuel's diary sent shivers down Emily's spine, but it also ignited a fire of determination. The school, once an ordinary building where she and her friends had spent years laughing, learning, and living, was now a place of dread. It was something else, something far darker than they had ever imagined. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the full picture was still shrouded in mystery. As the group gathered in the library, the diary spread out in front of them. Emily couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was watching them. The once comforting space now felt like a tomb, the silence in the room suffocating. The weight of Samuel's final entry, the unfinished sentence, the desperation in his handwriting, hung over them like a dark cloud. "His warnings are clear," Ryan said, breaking the silence, his voice low and shaky. "The school isn't just haunted. It's alive, and it wants something from us. But what? We need to know more," Emily responded, her voice firm. She couldn't afford to be afraid, not now. Not when their lives were on the line. She turned to Ben, who had been quiet since they'd found the diary. "You've been here the longest. You know the town's history. What can you tell us about this place? About why it's so wrong?" Ben shifted uncomfortably in his seat, looking down at his hands, clearly reluctant to speak. "I've heard rumors, but they were always just that, rumors. Stories we tell at sleepovers to scare each other. But some of them..." He hesitated, his eyes darting to the walls of the library. "Some of them are true." The rest of the group leaned in, sensing the shift in his tone. Emily's heart raced as she urged him on. "What rumors?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ben swallowed hard. "The school was built on the land where an asylum used to stand. An old asylum. The stories say that it was a place of experimentation. The patients there were treated horribly, subjected to inhumane treatments, things that no one talks about anymore. It was shut down after an uprising, but not before a lot of people died. No one talks about the asylum anymore, not really. But those stories... He trailed off, and the group could see that the weight of the past had crept up on him. Emily's thoughts raced. So you're saying, this school is built on the same land where they experimented on people? Where people died? Ben nodded, looking around as if he expected the walls to close in on them. Yes, and the rumors say the spirits of the patients, those who died, never left. They're trapped here. Some people claim they can still feel their presence, hear their whispers. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the place. She said that the building was built to keep them here. A chill swept through Emily as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Samuel's diary had mentioned spirits, had mentioned the fear that the building fed on. The spirits of the asylum patients, trapped in the walls of the school, were using the fear of the students to grow stronger. Wait, Sarah spoke up, her voice trembling. What do you mean it was built to keep them here? How Ben's gaze dropped, his face pale. It said that the asylum wasn't just a place for treatment, it was a prison. A place where the tortured souls were held. But the building was designed to trap them. To keep them from escaping, they never truly left. And when the asylum was shut down, they were sealed in. Buried with the building's foundations? The building itself is a prison, Ryan murmured. As the horror of the situation settled over them, Emily felt a sickening sense of dread coil in her stomach. The asylum, the spirits, the disappearances, it was all connected. The school wasn't just haunted by ghosts. It was built on a foundation of suffering and death, and now, it was feeding on the fear of the living. The building was alive in a way she couldn't begin to understand, and its hunger had only grown stronger over time. They needed more answers. Where did you hear all this, Ben? Emily asked, her voice tense. Ben glanced at the floor, avoiding her gaze. There's an old archive room hidden deep in the basement. My grandmother used to work here. She was one of the first custodians. She said that the old records, the original blueprints for the school, are down there. She told me never to go, but she said if I ever needed to understand, I could find answers there. But I've never gone until now. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. We have to go there, she said. If what you're telling us is true, then the blueprints could have the answers. They might tell us what the building is really capable of. The group exchanged uneasy glances. They had already delved too deep, but now it seemed they had no choice but to keep going. There was no turning back. Ben hesitated but nodded. I'll show you. But once we open those doors, we'll know the truth. And it won't be easy. Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself. The path ahead was unknown, but there was no turning back. They had to uncover the secrets buried in the walls of Westbrook High before it was too late. As they prepared to head toward the basement, the silence in the library grew oppressive. The air felt thick with the weight of the past, the ghosts of the asylum's tortured souls lingering just beyond the walls. And somewhere, deep within the building, the entity that had waited so long was awakening, feeding on their fear and pulling them closer to the inevitable. The air in the school had changed. It wasn't just the increasing number of disappearances, or the chilling discoveries about the school's dark history that unnerved Emily and her friends. It was the way the building itself felt, as if it had become aware of them. The once familiar hallways now seemed like hostile terrain, each corner hiding shadows that whispered with a life of their own. When they made their way to the basement, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The light overhead flickered erratically as they descended into the depths of Westbrook High, the stairwell growing colder with each step. The walls seemed to close in on them, and the very air felt heavy, thick with something old, something hungry. Ben led the way, his face pale, his steps hesitant as he approached a door at the far end of the basement. It was rusted and covered in cobwebs, the words staff only barely visible beneath layers of grime. He paused in front of it, his hand trembling as he reached for the old brass handle. Are you sure about this? Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The weight of what they were about to uncover hung in the air like a thick fog. Each second felt like it stretched into eternity. Ben nodded but didn't speak, his face a mask of dread. With a final, decisive turn of the handle, the door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of mildew, but the strangest thing was the silence. No humming, no buzz of electricity, no creak of old pipes, just an unnatural stillness like the room had been waiting for them. They stepped inside, and immediately, Emily felt the temperature drop. Her breath formed small clouds in the cold, the chill biting at her skin. The walls were lined with rows of filing cabinets, old bookshelves sagging under the weight of decades of forgotten records. The dim light from their flashlights cast long, ghostly shadows across the room, making the air feel thicker, as though the shadows themselves were alive. "Where are the blueprints?" Emily asked, trying to focus on the task at hand. Ben didn't respond at first. He walked to the back of the room and pulled open a drawer from one of the filing cabinets, revealing stacks of old papers, each one yellowed and frayed at the edges. He began to sift through them, his hands shaking as if the very act of opening these files was disturbing some ancient, hidden truth. Emily, Ryan, Sarah, and Ben gathered around him, peering over his shoulder. The sound of paper rustling filled the room as Ben pulled out a stack of large, brittle blueprints. They were faded, the ink worn, but there in the center of the page were the plans for the original asylum. Emily felt her pulse quicken as she studied the documents. The layout of the asylum was drawn in intricate detail, but there was something wrong about it, something off. The building's floor plan was like a maze, winding and convoluted with rooms that shouldn't have existed and hallways that led nowhere. It was as if the architect had designed the place to be a trap, intentionally disorienting and oppressive. "This is it," Ben whispered. "These are the original plans for the asylum. But there's more." His voice trailed off and Emily leaned in closer, her eyes scanning the document. There, near the bottom of the blueprint, were a series of markings, symbols, strange and unfamiliar. It wasn't just an architectural plan. It was a map for something darker, something ritualistic. Emily's hand trembled as she traced the lines with her finger. The symbols seemed to move beneath her touch as if the paper itself was alive, responding to her presence. "Look here," Ben said, his voice cracking. "These markings, they're not just part of the building. They're part of a ritual, a binding spell." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "A ritual?" She looked at Ben, confusion and fear written on her face. "What do you mean, a ritual?" "The asylum's founders," Ben continued, "they didn't just build a place to house the insane. They built it as a prison for something else, something ancient. The rituals they performed weren't for curing patients. They were for something darker. They believed they could summon a being, something powerful from the depths of the earth. They called it the Watcher, a creature that feeds on fear and thrives on suffering." A cold shiver ran down Emily's spine. She glanced at Ryan and Sarah, who stood frozen beside her, their faces pale. The weight of Ben's words settled over them like a suffocating fog. The school, the asylum, it had all been part of the same twisted scheme. And now the Watcher was awake. Before Emily could speak, a sudden crash echoed through the basement, followed by a low, guttural noise that sent a wave of terror washing over her. The sound came from somewhere deep within the walls of the school, a rumbling like an ancient beast awakening from a long slumber. The ground beneath their feet trembled and the room seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. Emily's breath hitched. What was that? Ben's face went white. "The school. It's waking up." A shadow passed over the papers and Emily looked up to find that the air had thickened. The room seemed darker now, the shadows deeper, moving in ways they shouldn't have. Then from the corner of the room she saw it, just a glimpse at first. A shape, something humanoid standing motionless in the darkness. Her heart skipped a beat. The shape shifted and moved, coming closer with each passing second. "We need to leave. Now!" Ryan snapped, his voice urgent. But it was too late. The shadows shifted again and suddenly the temperature plummeted. Emily could see her breath forming in the air and then with a sudden rush, the lights flickered and went out. The darkness in the basement swallowed them whole. And Emily could hear the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. Something in the school was awake, and it had been waiting for them. The silence of the basement was suffocating, heavy with the dread that hung in the air. Emily could feel the weight of something ancient and evil pressing in on them, as if the building itself were alive, breathing, watching them. The darkness seemed to crawl closer, the cold air wrapping around their bodies like a shroud, suffocating them in the vast empty space. "Emily, look." Sarah's voice was a strained whisper, her eyes wide with fear. Emily turned quickly, her heart pounding in her chest. In the flickering glow of their flashlight, she could see the dark, slithering shadows creeping across the walls, growing larger by the second. A form, familiar and horrifying, seemed to materialize out of the darkness. The same figure they had seen in the halls of the school. The one they thought was nothing more than a ghostly figment of their imagination was now standing before them, its shadowy outline taking shape in the corner of the room. It wasn't human. The figure was tall, its body twisted and distorted like a puppet whose strings were pulled by an unseen hand. The shadows around it seemed to bend and twist as though they were part of the thing itself, feeding off the fear in the room. The face, if it could even be called that, was an empty void, just an abyss that seemed to draw everything into it. And within that dark void, Emily could hear something, a low, guttural whisper, unintelligible at first, but growing clearer by the second. "Help me." The voice was like a scream caught in the throat, a sound that echoed with an impossible depth. Emily could feel it vibrating in her chest, rattling her very bones. It was the Watcher, the ancient being that had been awakened by the school's dark rituals, feeding on the fear of those trapped within. The entity seemed to breathe in the fear, growing stronger with every passing second. The walls seemed to shift as if the building itself were responding to the presence of the Watcher. Emily and her friends were trapped, no longer able to run, unable to escape the oppressive force that was closing in on them. "I told you." The voice of the entity broke through the silence again, its words drawing out like the scraping of nails on glass. "You should have never come. You are my feast." The shadows reached out for them, tendrils of darkness creeping across the floor like living things, closing in on Emily, Ryan, Sarah, and Ben. Panic surged through Emily's chest as she felt the oppressive force of the Watcher bearing down on them. They had been wrong to come here. The building's hunger had been awakened, and now there was no escape. "We have to stop it," Emily gasped, struggling to find her voice amidst the terror. "We can't let it complete the ritual." Ryan's face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. "But how do we stop something like this?"
"How do you stop that?"
He gestured at the looming shadow that had now completely filled the room, the air growing colder and colder with every passing second. Ben, his voice shaking, stumbled backward. "The ritual, it's tied to the land. The spirits, the ones who were tortured in the asylum, they're feeding the Watcher. It's using their pain, their suffering to grow stronger." Emily turned to Ben, her mind racing. "But what does it need?" "How do we stop it?" Ben swallowed hard, the fear in his eyes mixing with desperation. "It needs a sacrifice, a living soul with ties to the land. The original asylum. The ones whose bloodline is connected to the ritual." Emily froze. A horrifying realization settled in her stomach. She turned slowly to Lucy, who stood at the edge of the group, her face pale and stricken with terror. The truth hit Emily like a cold wave. "No," she whispered. "It's you." Lucy's eyes widened, her mouth opening in shock. What do you mean it's me?" "Your bloodline," Ben said in a strained voice. "The spirits, they've been waiting for you. You're tied to the land. Your ancestors were part of the original asylum. They were the ones who helped perform the ritual to summon the Watcher. It's your blood that's needed to complete the final sacrifice." Lucy took a step back, her eyes darting between Emily and Ben, the realization dawning on her face. "No, there's no way, this can't be real." But Emily knew deep in her gut that it was. Lucy had been drawn to the school in ways she couldn't explain. She had felt the pull, the strange connection to the building that Emily and the others had never truly understood. The entity had been waiting for her. "We have to stop it," Emily said, her voice desperate. "We can't let it take Lucy. It will be too late if we don't." Before she could finish her sentence, the ground beneath them rumbled, a low, terrible vibration that shook the very foundation of the building. The Watcher's shadow grew larger, as if the building itself was being swallowed by it. The walls seemed to bend and twist, the air becoming thick with the scent of decay. The ritual had begun in earnest, and there was no time left. A distant, bone-chilling laughter echoed in the dark corners of the room. The spirits of the asylum, their tortured souls bound to the land, were no longer silent. Their voices filled the space, joining with the Watchers as it began to pull at Lucy, its shadows reaching for her, calling her to complete the ritual. But Lucy wasn't ready to go down without a fight. "We can't give up," she gasped, her eyes wide with terror but filled with defiance. "There's got to be another way." Suddenly Emily saw it, the old ritual symbols they had found in the blueprints. The symbols that had seemed so meaningless before, now became her only hope. If they could use the symbols to reverse the ritual, they might have a chance. "We need to disrupt the ritual," Emily said, her voice more certain now. "We need to use the symbols. We have to break the binding. With no time to waste, the group rushed to the center of the room where the symbols from the blueprints had been marked. But as they began to focus their energy on the markings, the temperature plummeted again, and the entity, angrier than ever, lashed out. And just as Emily began to make sense of the symbols, a deafening roar filled the room. The Watcher, desperate to feed, its dark presence pulling at everything in its path. The ritual was nearing completion, and one of them would have to pay the price. The walls seemed to close in on them as Emily's words lingered in the air. "It's you, Lucy," she had whispered, the realization sending a ripple of dread through the group. Lucy stood frozen, her face pale as the weight of Emily's words sank in. She felt a dizzying surge of panic, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. She wanted to deny it, wanted to scream that this was all a terrible mistake, but deep down she knew it was true. The terror, the inexplicable pull she had always felt toward the school, the dreams, the strange sense of déjà vu, was all connected to the dark. Twisted history that had once haunted the asylum and now bled into the very bones of the building she walked through every day. Ben, looking between Emily and Lucy, finally spoke, his voice low and trembling. I didn't want to believe it, but it's the truth. I didn't know how to tell you, Lucy, but your family's lineage, it's tied to this place. Your great-grandfather was one of the original architects of the asylum. He helped design the building, the rituals, and the binding spells that kept the spirits locked here. Lucy's heart stopped. Her mouth went dry and the world around her seemed to blur. "No," she gasped, her mind reeling. "No, that can't be. My family was just regular. We have nothing to do with this place." Her voice cracked, her hands trembling. "I didn't want to tell you this," Ben continued, his eyes filled with guilt. "But the truth is, your bloodline is the key to breaking the ritual, and the key to completing it. Your great-grandfather was a custodian of the Watcher. He and a group of others had been part of the rituals that summoned it, bringing it to power, feeding it. The Watcher needs your blood to complete the curse." Emily's stomach churned as she watched Lucy's expression shift from disbelief to quiet horror. The school, the asylum, the spirits, everything was tied together in a web of darkness, and Lucy was at the center of it. Emily could feel the pressure building in the room. "Time was running out, why didn't you tell me earlier?" Lucy whispered, the words cutting through the thick air. She looked at Ben, eyes wide with betrayal. "You knew? You knew and never told me? All this time?" "I didn't want to drag you into this," Ben said, his voice barely audible. "But I didn't realize the full extent of what was happening until now. Until we found the diary and the blueprints. I thought the past was behind us. But the building is waking up, Lucy. The ritual, it's starting again. And it's after you." Lucy turned away, stumbling toward the far corner of the room. Her thoughts were spinning out of control, like a cyclone of confusion and terror. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't breathe. It felt like the walls were closing in, pressing down on her chest. Her gaze fell on the decaying walls, the lines of ancient symbols, the markings on the blueprints they had found. They were the key. And now she realized she was the key. The realization was as horrifying as it was impossible to ignore. But the more she thought about it, the more the pieces came together. The things she had felt, those strange dreams, the pull she felt when she first stepped into the school years ago, her inexplicable connection to the asylum. It all made sense now. She had been part of this, inherently part of this, since her birth. Her great-grandfather had been part of the very rituals that had awakened this demon, this Watcher, and it seemed that the bloodline had been passed down, waiting for the next heir to take their place in the dark cycle. "Lucy," Emily's voice broke through the fog of her thoughts. "We can stop this. You don't have to become a part of the ritual. We can still break the curse together." The words felt hollow as they left Emily's mouth. What choice did they have? The ritual was already in motion. The Watcher was closer than ever, its power growing, its presence suffocating. Lucy was the catalyst, the bloodline the entity had been waiting for. "I don't want this," Lucy whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I don't want to be the key. I don't want to feed it." She turned toward her friends, her face filled with a mix of anger and fear. "But if I'm the key, then what the hell do I do? What can I do to stop it?" Emily stepped forward, her hand reaching for Lucy's. "We fight. We find the ritual and we break it. We find a way to sever the tie between you and the Watcher. We make sure it never happens again." Lucy looked at her friends, at Ryan and Ben, who were both standing silently, their faces grim but filled with resolve. She could see the fear in their eyes, but also the determination. They weren't going to let her face this alone. They would fight together no matter what it cost them. But the building, Lucy began, her voice faltering. It's alive. It feeds on fear. How can we possibly stop something like that? By confronting it, Emily said, her voice firm as she turned toward the group. The spirits, the ritual, they need our fear. We need to confront it head on, expose it, and break the cycle. We don't give it what it wants. As the group huddled together, the weight of their decision hung in the air like an invisible chain. There was no turning back now. The Watcher was already waking, its presence growing stronger with each passing second. And Lucy, the reluctant heir, was the only one who could truly break the curse. But in order to do so, they would have to walk into the heart of the darkness itself. The building was ready to devour them. The ritual was nearly complete, but Emily's resolve was unwavering. They would stop the Watcher, no matter the cost. And as Lucy stood among them, she felt the pull of the darkness, but also the strength of her friends. Together, they would face whatever came next. The tension in the air was palpable as Emily, Lucy, Ryan, and Ben stood together in the dim light of the basement. The walls around them seemed to close in, pressing them toward an inevitable fate they were still struggling to fully comprehend. The Watcher, the entity they had unwittingly awakened, was growing stronger by the hour. It was no longer lurking in the shadows. It was moving through the halls, its power feeding on their fear, and time was slipping away. We have to find a way to stop this, Emily said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and determination. She turned toward Lucy, who looked more fragile than ever, but Emily knew she was the only one who could break the curse. There has to be a way to sever the connection, to stop the Watcher from using you. Lucy nodded, but her eyes were clouded with doubt. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't even know where to start. Everything feels like it's closing in on me, like the school itself is pushing me into its grasp. Ben placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll do this together. We'll figure it out. But we can't wait any longer. The longer we stay here, the stronger it gets. Ryan, who had been silent for a while, spoke up, his voice tight with fear. It's not just the Watcher. The school itself. It's alive. I can feel it. I don't know if it's the spirits or the entity or the ritual, it doesn't matter. The building is twisting everything, distorting reality. It's like the walls are changing, the floor's shifting. Every time I think I've figured out where I am, I turn a corner and everything's different. Emily nodded, her mind racing as she processed everything they had learned. The blueprints, the symbols, the ritual. The school was designed to be a prison, and now it was pulling them into its web, warping the very fabric of space and time within its walls. The corridors they had walked down earlier no longer seemed the same. The layout of the school was constantly shifting, its familiar corners and hallways growing unfamiliar and oppressive. Every door led them in circles, every hallway stretched on endlessly, and the walls pulsed with a sinister energy. We need to get to the heart of the school, Emily said, her voice rising in urgency. That's where the ritual started. That's where the Watcher is strongest. If we can break the heart of this place, we might have a chance to end it. Lucy looked at her, confusion and fear written on her face. The heart of the school? What do you mean? Emily gestured around them. The old wing. The part of the school that's been sealed off. The original asylum, the place where the rituals were performed. The Watcher's power is strongest there. If we can find it, we might be able to undo the binding. Ben shuddered at the thought. You're saying we go into the old part of the school? The part they sealed off years ago? No one goes in there. That's exactly why we have to, Emily said, her eyes locked on Ben. The answers are in that part of the school. We don't have a choice. The Watcher is here and it's coming for Lucy. We need to stop this now. The group exchanged uncertain glances, but none of them protested. They had come too far. The truth was clear now, there was no running from it. The school was alive, feeding on their fear, and the only way to end the terror was to confront it directly. As they made their way out of the basement, the hallway ahead of them seemed to distort. The walls appeared to stretch, their angles shifting in ways that defied logic. The air grew thicker, colder, and Emily could feel the building itself pushing against them, trying to draw them deeper into its clutches. Ryan stopped in his tracks, his eyes widening in panic. Do you feel that? He whispered. The building, it's not just trying to keep us in. It's changing us. We're changing. Emily turned to look at him, but before she could respond, a low, growling noise echoed through the hallway. It came from deep within the walls, reverberating through the floor beneath their feet. The sound was bone-chilling, an otherworldly growl that seemed to make the air vibrate. "We have to keep moving," Emily said, her voice tight with fear. "We're running out of time." But as they continued down the hallway, the atmosphere grew even more oppressive. The walls seemed to close in on them with each step, as if the building itself was alive and squeezing them into a smaller, tighter space. Emily could hear her breath sharp and ragged, and she glanced around, hoping to find something familiar, but everything looked the same. The walls, the floor, the doors, they were all shifting, warping as though reality itself was buckling under the weight of the entity that had awakened. They reached the end of the hallway where an old, rusted door stood, its surface pocked with rust and decay. A sense of foreboding hung in the air like a storm cloud, and Emily felt a chill creep up her spine. This was it, the heart of the school. The doorway to the old wing, the place where the asylum had once stood. The place where the ritual had begun. "This is it," Emily whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "We have to go in." With a trembling hand, she turned the handle and pushed the door open. A wave of stale air hit them like a physical blow, and Emily's heart raced as she stepped into the darkness. The room beyond was dimly lit by a single flickering light bulb, casting long shadows across the walls. The air smelled of old paper, mildew, and something else, something metallic like blood. Inside, the walls were covered in faded maps and symbols like the ones they had found in the blueprints. The place was ancient, untouched for years, yet the air felt charged with energy, as if the building had been waiting for them to open this door. In the center of the room stood an altar, its surface dark with age, the carvings on it worn and faded but still recognizable. Emily felt a shiver run through her as she realized what they had found. The altar was the center of the ritual, the heart of the Watcher's power, and it was still alive. Before she could speak, the ground trembled beneath their feet. The air grew thick, suffocating, and a low, guttural voice echoed through the room. "You are mine." The room was suffocating. The shadows seemed to twist and crawl, closing in on Emily, Lucy, Ryan, and Ben. The oppressive weight of the Watcher's presence filled the space, pulsing with a dark energy that made the very air feel thick and alive. They were trapped, caught in the heart of the school's darkest secret, and the deeper they went, the stronger the entity became. Emily's breath came in shallow gasps as she stepped into the room, her body vibrating with the force of the building's power. The walls seemed to move, the space around them warping, shifting like a living thing. The altar in the center of the room loomed over them, its surface coated with ancient symbols that pulsed with an eerie light. A low hum filled the air, as if the building itself was alive, breathing and feeding off their fear. Emily looked at Lucy, who was standing at the edge of the room, her face pale and wide-eyed. The girl had always been the strongest among them, but now the weight of the truth was breaking her. Her body trembled, her hands clenched at her sides as she stared at the altar, the place where it had all begun. "Lucy, you're the key," Emily whispered, her voice strained. "You have to fight it. Don't let it take you." Lucy's eyes flickered toward Emily, the words barely sinking in. "I don't know how," she said, her voice raw with fear. "It's too powerful. I can feel it inside me. Pulling me, calling me." Ryan stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "We've come this far. We can't stop now. We have to face it, whatever it is." Ben, standing near the altar, his face a mask of dread, added, "It's not just about breaking the curse. The Watcher is tied to this place. If we destroy it, we destroy the source. But we have to be willing to sacrifice everything." The air grew colder and Emily could feel a presence behind her. She spun around, but there was nothing, just darkness. But that feeling, the one she had been suppressing, returned in full force. They weren't alone. The Watcher was close. "You cannot fight me." The voice was deep, malevolent, an ancient growl that reverberated through their bones. The room seemed to tilt and shift as if the walls were breathing, expanding and contracting around them. "You are already part of me, and you will never escape." The darkness thickened, swirling in the corners of the room, and Emily felt a chill crawl down her spine. It was like the Watcher's words had power, each syllable shaking the very foundation of the school. She could feel it, its hunger, its need to consume them, to take them as it had taken so many before. Lucy staggered back, her hands gripping her head. "No, I won't be part of this," she cried, her voice breaking with terror. But it was too late. The Watcher's influence had already begun to take hold. Ryan reached out to her, but it was as if an invisible force held him back, pushing him away. He struggled against the unseen pressure but couldn't get closer. It was as if the air itself was thickening, separating them. Suddenly the room seemed to open up, the darkness folding in on itself. The floor beneath their feet began to crack and an overwhelming sense of dread washed over them. From the shadows, figures began to emerge, human shapes twisted and broken, their faces gaunt and hollow. They moved silently, slowly, as if they were the remnants of long-forgotten souls trapped in the school's grip. Emily's breath caught in her throat. These weren't just shadows. These were the lost students, the ones who had vanished. Their faces were hollowed out, their eyes empty, staring vacantly at the group. They moved like puppets, their limbs jerking unnaturally, as though they were being controlled by the very building itself. "They're here," Emily whispered, her voice shaking with fear. "The others," the lost ones, "they're trapped here with us." The figures approached slowly, their bodies twitching with each movement as though they were only partially alive. Their mouths opened and Emily could hear their desperate whispers. "Help me. We're stuck." "You're next." The whispers flooded the room, growing louder and louder until the sound became deafening. Emily pressed her hands to her ears, but it was no use. The voices were in her head now, circling, pressing in from all directions. The building was feeding on them, on their fear, on their terror. The spirits of the past were trapped just as Samuel had written in his diary, doomed to relive their torment forever. And now, Emily realized, they were becoming part of it. They were becoming part of the ritual, trapped in the same endless cycle. But then, through the overwhelming noise and the rising panic, Emily saw something. A flicker of light, faint but undeniable. It was the altar. The symbols carved into the stone were glowing, their eerie light pulsing like a heartbeat, like the building itself was alive. "Lucy," Emily shouted, turning to her friend whose body was shaking uncontrollably. Her face twisted in terror as the darkness pressed against her. "Lucy, you have to fight it. You're the only one who can stop it." Lucy's eyes flickered, her gaze lost in the growing darkness, but at the sound of Emily's voice, a spark of clarity returned. She looked down at her hands as though seeing them for the first time, and then back at the altar. The bloodline, the connection to the building, it was hers to break. She was the key. "No," Lucy whispered, the word barely audible. "I won't let it take me." With a trembling hand, Lucy reached out, placing her palm on the altar. The moment her skin made contact with the cold stone, the room trembled. A deep guttural growl filled the air as the Watcher screamed in fury. The shadows recoiled, the spirits screamed in agony, and the walls seemed to crack, groaning under the pressure of the ancient power that had been awakened. But Lucy did not pull away. She stood firm, her eyes closed, her mind focused. She could feel the darkness swirling around her, but this time she was ready. She would fight it. She had to. The Watcher's presence pressed down harder, but Lucy's will was stronger. She could hear the voices now, the spirits, the tortured souls, their pleas for release. "Help us. Break the curse." With one final desperate cry, Lucy shouted, "I refuse to be part of this." In that instant, the air snapped, the shadows shuddered, and the Watcher's voice, once powerful and relentless, faltered. A violent wave of energy crashed through the room, knocking Emily and the others off their feet. The walls began to crack, the very foundation of the school shaking as if it were being torn apart. The spirits screamed as the building's hold on them weakened, but the Watcher was not finished yet. The room exploded with light, and Emily felt herself pulled into a vortex of darkness, the world around her spinning, twisting, and then everything went silent. The silence that followed the explosion of light was deafening. For a moment, everything seemed frozen in time, suspended in a breathless, unnatural stillness. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she slowly opened her eyes. The room, which had once been filled with shadows and malevolent whispers, was now eerily quiet. The oppressive weight of the Watcher's presence had disappeared, leaving behind only the faintest echo of its dark power. But the stillness was far from comforting. It was the calm before the storm. Lucy stood at the altar, her body trembling with exhaustion. Her fingers were still pressed against the cold stone, her eyes wide and unfocused. She had fought it. She had fought the Watcher with everything she had, but the toll it had taken on her was evident. The bloodline, the curse, it had all come rushing to the forefront, and the battle had drained her. "Lucy," Emily whispered, taking a cautious step toward her friend. "Lucy, are you okay?" Lucy's gaze flickered toward Emily, but there was no recognition in her eyes, just a deep, hollow emptiness. I tried to break it." Her voice was weak, distant, as if she were speaking from the depths of a fog. "But I don't know if I can. I don't know if it's enough." Emily's stomach twisted. She had hoped that Lucy's defiance, her willingness to fight, would be enough to end it. But the darkness still lingered in the air, like a storm cloud waiting to unleash its fury. The Watcher wasn't gone. Not completely. The ground beneath them trembled again, and the room seemed to pulse as though the building itself were alive, responding to the anger and fear that still clung to its walls. The altar, which had once glowed with a soft, eerie light, now flickered as if the power was beginning to drain. Emily's heart raced as she realized what was happening. "The ritual," Ryan said, his voice breaking through the silence. "It's not over. It's not finished." "No," Ben said, his voice thick with dread. "It can't be. If Lucy didn't break the ritual completely, then it's only a matter of time before the Watcher's power is restored. It's tied to the bloodline. And Lucy," he trailed off, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Lucy, you're the key. The Watcher needs your blood, your essence, to finish the curse." Lucy looked up at him, her face pale, her eyes wide with understanding. "No, I can't. I won't be part of it. I won't let it take me again." "Lucy," Emily said urgently, stepping forward. "You're not alone. We can break this. We can stop it together." But as Lucy's eyes met Emily's, Emily knew the truth. They had come so far, but there was still one choice left to make. A terrible, impossible choice. The Watcher's power surged again, growing stronger with every passing second. Emily could feel it. The entity was raging within the walls of the school, angry that its ritual had been interrupted, that its plans had been delayed. But the Watcher wasn't finished. It needed one last piece to complete the ritual, the ultimate sacrifice. Lucy's body trembled violently, her face contorted with fear and confusion. "What do we do? What can we do? It's too late." Her voice broke with anguish as she looked at her friends, their faces pale with helplessness. Emily reached out, her hand trembling as she grasped Lucy's arm. "We fight, we end it. We can break the curse together. But you..." She paused, taking a deep breath. "You're the key. The bloodline. You're the one who has to make the sacrifice." Lucy shook her head. "No, I can't." "It's the only way," Emily said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "We've seen it. The Watcher can't be defeated without the final sacrifice. You're the one it needs. But if you give yourself up, if you make the ultimate sacrifice, the ritual will be broken. The Watcher will be sealed away forever. The school, this place, will be free." Lucy looked down at the altar, her face torn with indecision. The weight of the decision seemed to crush her, pulling her in two directions. She could feel the Watcher's pull, its dark tendrils reaching into her very soul, promising an eternity of power, of vengeance, and yet she could also feel something else, the love of her friends, the bond that had tied them together, the hope that they could end this nightmare. She closed her eyes, swallowing hard. "I don't want this," she whispered. "But if this is the only way, if it's the only way to save you all?" The words came out as a sob, and Emily's heart broke for her. No one should ever have to make such a choice. "I'll do it," Lucy said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I'll sacrifice myself to break the curse, to stop it from taking all of us." Ryan and Ben stood back, their faces pale, but they didn't argue. They knew what had to be done. There was no other choice. Lucy was the key, and her sacrifice was the only way to stop the Watcher from claiming anyone else. As the tension in the room reached its breaking point, Emily stepped forward, her hand gently resting on Lucy's shoulder. "You're not alone," she said softly. "We'll be with you. Always." The Watcher's roar echoed from within the walls, its voice rising in fury as it realized what was happening. But it was too late. The ritual had already begun to unravel. Emily watched as Lucy stepped toward the altar, her face serene despite the pain. She was giving everything to break the curse, to free them all. And as Lucy placed her hands on the cold stone of the altar, The shadows around them began to twist and convulse. The Watcher screamed in fury, but Emily could feel it weakening, its power flickering like a dying flame. The entity's presence began to fade, the darkness receding, the room growing lighter. With a final, desperate howl, the Watcher was torn apart, its dark energy dissipating into the air, vanishing like smoke in the wind. The building trembled, its walls shaking as if the foundation itself were being ripped apart. The curse was broken, but the price had been paid. The silence that followed the Watcher's defeat was deafening. The world seemed to hold its breath, suspended in that one fragile moment before the weight of reality came crashing down. Emily, Ryan, and Ben stood in stunned silence, watching Lucy, who stood at the altar, her body trembling but still. The air around them was thick with the echoes of the battle they had just fought, the battle they had won. But as the dust settled, Emily felt a strange sense of unease creeping in. The walls, though quiet now, seemed to pulse like they were alive. The Watcher was gone, but the building was still here. The oppressive atmosphere that had suffocated them for so long lingered in the air, and the sense of finality she had expected was nowhere to be found. Lucy's eyes were wide, her face pale, her features drained of the strength they had carried just moments ago. She was still, as if the sacrifice had taken every last ounce of her energy. Emily moved to her side, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Lucy," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "You did it. You broke the curse." Lucy's gaze met hers, but it was distant, as though she were somewhere far away, lost in the abyss of the sacrifice she had made. I don't feel free," she said, her voice thin and strained. "I feel like it's still here, like it's still watching me." Emily felt her heart skip. The Watcher was gone. They had broken the curse. But Lucy was right. Something wasn't right. The school felt different now, yes, emptier, quieter. But the echoes of the Watcher, the weight of the ritual, still lingered like a shadow. I think we need to leave," Ben said, his voice low, looking nervously around the room. "This place is still alive, Lucy. The curse might be broken, but the building, the evil it was built on, it's still here." Ryan nodded, stepping forward. "We can't stay here. This place is still feeding. We need to get out before..." Before he could finish, the floor beneath them shook violently. A deep rumbling sound reverberated through the walls, and the entire building seemed to tremble with an ancient primal force. The air turned frigid, and a low, unnatural hum filled the room, rising in pitch until it became unbearable. The lights overhead flickered violently, casting long, twisted shadows across the room. "It's not over," Emily whispered, her voice tight with fear. Her heart pounded in her chest as the reality of what was happening hit her with full force. They had thought the Watcher was defeated, that the curse was lifted. But it wasn't just the entity that was tied to this place. The building itself was an anchor for the darkness. The rituals had bound it to the land, to them. "Lucy," Emily said urgently, taking her friend's hand. "We need to go now," but Lucy didn't move. Her face was pale, her eyes unfocused, as if she were lost in a trance. The building seemed to be calling to her, pulling her back into its darkness. Emily shook her, but it was as if Lucy were no longer fully there. "I can't," Lucy whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't leave. It's not finished. The building, it wants me." Ryan and Ben moved to her side, but they could all feel it now. The pull of the school's malevolent force wrapping its cold fingers around their hearts, drawing them back toward the altar. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she realized the horrifying truth. The building hadn't been defeated. The curse hadn't been truly broken. It had only been delayed. The ritual had been meant to feed the Watcher, but it had also been designed to feed the building itself. The darkness was bound to the school, woven into its very foundations, and as long as it stood, it would never be free. The Watcher's influence might have waned, but the building was still alive, still feeding, still waiting for the next cycle to begin. "No," Emily gasped, her voice shaking with disbelief. "We're too late." The building groaned, the walls shifting and contorting as if the structure itself was fighting to hold them in. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch further, twisting and writhing like living things. The spirits, the ones who had been trapped here, were calling out to them, their tortured voices rising in a crescendo of anguish. Lucy, still rooted to the altar, lifted her head, her eyes now wide with understanding and fear. She finally broke free of the building's hold and turned toward Emily, her voice hollow with resignation. I thought I could break it. I thought I could end it. But the school, it feeds on us. It's a prison, a cycle that will never end. We're part of it now, all of us, forever. Before Emily could respond, the ground beneath them cracked, and a wave of darkness surged toward them, swallowing everything in its path. The walls seemed to break open, revealing nothing but an endless, empty void beyond. No, Emily screamed, pulling Lucy toward the door, but it was too late. The force of the building's power pushed them backward toward the altar. She could feel herself being pulled into the darkness, the pull of the curse too strong to resist. But as the darkness closed in around them, Emily felt a faint flicker of hope, a memory of the fight they had fought together, the strength of their bond. They couldn't give up. They had come too far to let this place claim them. Lucy, Emily shouted. We break the cycle now. With every ounce of strength she could summon, Emily pushed against the pull of the building, clutching Lucy's hand and holding on for dear life. The darkness raged around them, but Emily knew one thing. They had to make it out. They had to escape the endless cycle before it consumed them. And in that moment, as the building's power reached its peak, Emily realized the true cost of the curse. The school might never be free. The darkness would always return as long as the land stood. But for them, this battle was over. The price had been paid. Lucy, Emily said urgently, taking her friend's hand. We need to go now, but Lucy didn't move. Her face was pale, her eyes unfocused, as if she were lost in a trance. The building seemed to be calling to her, pulling her back into its darkness. Emily shook her, but it was as if Lucy were no longer fully there. I can't, Lucy whispered, her voice breaking. I can't leave. It's not finished. The building, it wants me. Ryan and Ben moved to her side, but they could all feel it now. The pull of the school's malevolent force wrapping its cold fingers around their hearts, drawing them back toward the altar. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she realized the horrifying truth. The building hadn't been defeated. The curse hadn't been truly broken. It had only been delayed. The ritual had been meant to feed the Watcher, but it had also been designed to feed the building itself. The darkness was bound to the school, woven into its very foundations, and as long as it stood, it would never be free. The Watcher's influence might have waned, but the building was still alive, still feeding, still waiting for the next cycle to begin. No, Emily gasped, her voice shaking with disbelief. We're too late. The building groaned, the walls shifting and contorting as if the structure itself was fighting to hold them in. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch further, twisting and writhing like living things. The spirits, the ones who had been trapped here, were calling out to them, their tortured voices rising in a crescendo of anguish. Lucy, still rooted to the altar, lifted her head, her eyes now wide with understanding and fear. She finally broke free of the building's hold and turned toward Emily, her voice hollow with resignation. I thought I could break it. I thought I could end it. But the school, it feeds on us. It's a prison, a cycle that will never end. We're part of it now, all of us, forever. Before Emily could respond, the ground beneath them cracked, and a wave of darkness surged toward them, swallowing everything in its path. The walls seemed to break open, revealing nothing but an endless, empty void beyond. No, Emily screamed, pulling Lucy toward the door, but it was too late. The force of the building's power pushed them backward toward the altar. She could feel herself being pulled into the darkness, the pull of the curse too strong to resist. But as the darkness closed in around them, Emily felt a faint flicker of hope, a memory of the fight they had fought together, the strength of their bond. They couldn't give up. They had come too far to let this place claim them. Lucy, Emily shouted. We break the cycle now. With every ounce of strength she could summon, Emily pushed against the pull of the building, clutching Lucy's hand and holding on for dear life. The darkness raged around them, but Emily knew one thing. They had to make it out. They had to escape the endless cycle before it consumed them. And in that moment, as the building's power reached its peak, Emily realized the true cost of the curse. The school might never be free. The darkness would always return as long as the land stood. But for them, this battle was over. The price had been paid.